All right, we're back with another episode of the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show. Tuesday, Election Day, November 5th, 2024. I am one of your hosts, Kris Baker. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects. And with me, as always, is Matthew Fairburn, Sabres writer for The Athletic. You can find all of Matthew's work at theathletic.com/Sabres. And we are here today to talk about the Sabres and this important stretch of hockey that they have coming up. So we are recording this Tuesday afternoon ahead of the Sabres home game against the Ottawa Senators down at KeyBank Center at 7 p.m. But before we begin, if you could please like this video, subscribe to the channel. You can find the Baker Fairburn Hockey Show on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. If you could please leave a 5-star review. So Matthew, you're down at the arena. They just had the pregame skate. I don't believe Ottawa has taken the ice yet for their pregame skate, but the Sabres are sitting here right now. Losers of 3 straight games with a 4-7-1 record on the year. And this team has an important stretch of hockey coming up, starting with tonight's game against the Senators, division matchup, another young team who, frankly, I think they're kind of clawing their way out of some recent mediocrity, kind of similar to what the Sabres are at right now. But, we're going to talk about the schedule that's coming up because obviously, this next 10 games I think are very important. But you were down for the skate. You talked to some of the players, and I think Lindy also addressed the media. Where's the team at here as they look to right the ship coming off these 3 straight losses?
This is the first time this season, maybe not the first time, but this feels like a significant tone shift from Lindy Ruff in the last few days. Frustration from the 3-game losing streak and really trying to emphasize publicly to reporters and fans who watch these press conferences and to his team that the standard needs to be higher than what they've shown through 12 games to this point. Okay, hockey is not good enough, is what he said on Monday after practice. And today when I asked him how players are kind of responding to this increased accountability that they asked for, or this raising of the standard compared to maybe where it was over the last few years, as part of his answer, he said this is one of the hardest working teams, if not the hardest working team in practice he's had, which is interesting. He said they're engaged throughout practice, video sessions. The one thing he pointed to, though, is that under pressure, this team needs to perform. And he's not even talking big picture when he says that. A lot of times we heard that from Don Granato over the last couple of years about the pressure of expectations, the privilege of that pressure, learning to play with that pressure. Lindy Ruff is simply talking about within a game, this Sabres team needs to be able to take advantage of its opportunities. They had chances to tie the game against Detroit, didn't do it. They had chances against the Islanders, didn't capitalize, made enough mistakes for the Islanders to take advantage. Even the Florida game, you could say there were chances they had to swing that game a different way, and they didn't capitalize. All of a sudden, you have a 3-game losing streak. You're 4-7-1. You're coming into this game against Ottawa, who has climbed ahead of you in the standings and maybe in the big picture. And it feels almost must win in some ways. Because if you drop to 4-8-1, in fact, we were just talking before we hit record, if the Sharks win tonight and the Sabres lose, the Sabres will be, at best, tied for last place in the NHL. Potentially, depending what happens with Philly and a few other teams, they could be in sole possession of last place in the NHL. And I think regardless of how optimistic you are or how much runway you think is left in the season, being in last place in November is not a recipe for ending the 13-year playoff drought. So I thought the comment about pressure and performing under pressure was interesting to me because sort of the theme of our show today is the opportunity that is facing the Sabres in this next chunk of games that they have. And if, they need to be taking advantage of opportunities within games, but they also need to do it here with the schedule they have coming up between now and Thanksgiving, which is the traditional marker for you better have a spot at the table on Thanksgiving. Otherwise, it's going to be hard to wrestle one away.
Yeah, and we're going to get to the big picture for sure. I think, with this team, we've seen them start better than they did last year on many nights. We've also seen them give up leads that they've had. And that's where it's just like this team, I always say it. I'm not going to say that institutional illness again, even though I just did, but they always find a way to lose games when they get a lead, this young group. And it's mind boggling. In terms of the lineup tonight, were there any indicators? And again, I don't want to overly focus on this game, but while we're here and there is a game tonight, we know that Connor Clifton didn't play last game. Do we think that he gets back in tonight? Are there any indicators that you saw from the skate as far as starting goaltender or line shakeups or, roster moves for tonight's game?
Based on what Lindy said early this week, two things. One, he was happy with Jacob Bryson on Saturday, and so it would not surprise me if he gets another opportunity. He also, with Clifton this morning, mentioned he needs to be playing better. He hasn't, been up to the standard. And so that's the reason why he has been out of the lineup. So that may continue here for another game as they, if he liked Bryson so much. The other thing that we're watching is Zach Benson. Lindy Ruff was non-committal to whether Benson would get in the lineup. It's worth watching because they do need to make a move if he does get into the lineup. If he comes off injured reserve and plays in this game, they need to do something, whether that's sending Kulik down, even if just for a day. They could potentially play with like a conditioning assignment, potentially with Gilbert, because he hasn't played in so long. If he were open to that, there's things they could do. But one of the logical things as of 4 or 5 days ago would have been to waive Jacob Bryson. But now that because he hadn't played all year, but now that he's cracked his way into the lineup, it becomes a more interesting numbers game. Benson was on the ice at practice yesterday. He was on the second power play unit. He was rotating in on the second line. He was on the ice for the optional morning skate here on Tuesday. So things are trending the right way. But Lindy Ruff said he wanted to see how he felt after the skate before committing to him being in the lineup. So that is probably the big thing to watch. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen appears like he will be in the starters crease for the Buffalo Sabres. And we'll see if old friend Linus Ullmark gets the same assignment for the Senators. But either way, they've been getting some pretty solid, team-wide, performance from Ottawa. So we'll see what happens there. But that's the Sabres end of things from this morning.
Gotcha. No, so on Benson, it sounds like regardless of whether or not he plays tonight on Tuesday against Ottawa, it does seem like that's not looking like a guy based on his usage in practice that's going to go down to Rochester for a conditioning stint. So to your point, it's going to be interesting to see. You mentioned Clifton coming out, by the way, and staying out for a second game in a row. Meanwhile, Jack Quinn only spent one in the press box, right?
So Jack Quinn spent one in the press box. So if Clifton does spend a second night in a row in the press box, I do wonder about that's why I asked the question about how guys are receiving this accountability from person to person, from the team level, because, Quinn gets one game off. Samuelson hasn't gotten a single game off, and he's had his share of rough moments. Clifton has been useful on the penalty kill at times. He is, I think, experienced in that regard. And so it's going to be something to monitor throughout the season, because when the accountability word is the big buzzword coming into a year, how many times do you get to press the button, and who do you press it with, and how often and how long do you keep guys out of the lineup? I think it goes back to it not being such a simple equation that people want it to be, is this guy plays bad, take him out. I think it's the problem. It could potentially become the problem Don Granato ran into last year, where you could take guys out, but who do you put in for him? And if you take a guy out and his replacement doesn't play well, the accountability message starts to get a little weaker, right? The ultimate accountability is having guys that can push you in the lineup. And so Benson getting healthy is that for Kulik and Quinn potentially, but Bryson, if he plays well, could be that lever that they can pull with a few different defensemen potentially.
So that said, okay, so let's kind of, I guess, step out of just looking at tonight's game microscopically, and I think we need to really start looking at the big picture with this club. Like I mentioned, they're 4-7-1. Disappointing start. Worse start than last year. Worse start than I think the last 6 or 7 years. Per
Worst
that
start
stat.
under Kevin Adams. Worst start since 2017-18, which was a last place finishing Buffalo Sabres team in the first year with Jason Botterill as general manager.
So I think it's very wise, given what we mentioned, that Thanksgiving is kind of that line of demarcation. It's the first major benchmark on the hockey calendar in terms of, okay, you know, if you're a contender for the playoffs or not, that's where, you know, you need to be in position, in playoff position, or very well close to it on American Thanksgiving. Last 2 seasons in the Eastern Conference, 7 of the 8 teams that were in playoff position on Thanksgiving made the playoffs. And we'll kind of get into some of those numbers a little bit. Thanksgiving this year is a little bit later than last year. Last year, Thanksgiving fell on November 23rd. The Sabres at that time were 19 games into their season. They were 8-9-2 with 18 points. They were sitting 3 points out of the final wildcard spot at that point in time a year ago. Like I mentioned, 7 of the 8 teams a year ago that were in playoff position did indeed make the Eastern Conference playoffs. So the exception last year, by the way, was the New York Islanders. As you recall, they were a little bit out of playoff position a year ago. And on Thanksgiving, they were only 2 points out at the time, but they went on this crazy April heater. They won 8 of their last 9 games, and they nabbed the 3rd spot in the Metro Division at the end of the year. The team that fell out of playoff position, by the way, that was in there on Thanksgiving was the Detroit Red Wings, who lost 12 of 15 games last year in the second half of the season between February 29th all through March. Epic fallout, if you think about it. They allowed the pack back in. Philly was there knocking on the door. They were hovering around the playoffs and Thanksgiving, but they showed that they weren't ready for prime time. That's a team that ended the year losing 9 of their last 11, including an 8-game point streak in the final couple weeks of the season. So I think the moral of the story here is, if you're the Sabres, you know, this is the time when you look at the schedule. These games are very winnable. I want to go through and I think set the table, Matthew. I think that this 10 games is very critical for the Buffalo Sabres. And I want to make it like a mini season almost. I think it'd be really important to just almost make this like a mini season. Don't look at anything else. You have to find a way in a very winnable schedule. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, to get yourself up either in a wild card spot, knocking on the door of a wild card spot. Like, you can't be more than 1 or 2 points out. I think there's an exception. If you go back 2 years ago, again, 7 of the 8 teams that were in playoff position in the East 2 years ago ended up making the playoffs. And it was Florida that went on that late run. They won 6 games in a row late in the season. And again, Detroit was the team that fell out 2 years ago. They won just 7 of their final 25 games. So this is why it's really critical, though. Like, if you're the Sabres, take control of your destiny here in this 10-game stretch. Don't bank on your ability to go on this crazy heater late in the year like the Islanders did a year ago, or Florida did 2 years ago.
Or Edmonton last year, right? Or Nashville last year. The way those,
oh my God.
Nashville needed a point in 19 straight games to get back in. They needed to cancel the team trip to the U2 concert. You don't want to have to cancel trips to U2 concerts, Kris.
No, and the Oilers too, right? They fired their coach. They hired Kris Knoblauch. It was November 12th. I actually wrote this down. They went on a crazy tear. They won 26 of 32 games. They had winning streaks of 8 and 16 through January after hiring Knoblauch. So it's like, again, if the Sabres can't win 4 in a row,
the Oilers also have Connor McDavid. You may have heard.
Yeah, that kind of helps you. Yeah.
That's a decent little boost to your chance to rip off some wins. So even if you think that the Sabres are better than their record, the underlying metrics don't suggest that they're dramatically better than their record. They suggest that they're an average to below average team that maybe should have 3 or 4 more points than they do. And part of the problem as we set the table for this 10-game stretch, and people wonder why talk about a 10-game stretch like it's going to define the season. Well, at the moment, the wild card teams in the Eastern Conference are the Capitals with 16 points, the Bruins with 13 points. Both, that's Sabres have 9 points, so they're already trailing somewhat significantly there. But beyond just the points back, you have Ottawa, Columbus, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and the Islanders ahead of the Sabres in points at the moment. And there's a few teams that, have a game in hand on the Sabres. The Sabres have a game in hand on a couple of those, but that's a lot of teams that you have to leapfrog. To your point, a lot of teams that you have to count on giving up position. Now, you're only a couple points behind one of those teams, or 4 points behind a few of the others, but if you let that gap grow, percentages tell you that a few of those teams are going to take advantage of it, a few of them won't. So that's where these next 10 games really, I almost feel as the team probably has to take it as the next game, right? They're playing the Ottawa Senators tonight. The Ottawa Senators are one of those teams that will be fighting for that wild card spot. They are ahead of the Sabres with a game in hand. They're ahead of the Sabres by 3 points. You lose tonight, they still have a game in hand, and they are up 5 points on you. That's big. That's not insurmountable, but that little difference does matter. And they need to, I almost think the toughest part of this next 10-game stretch is this week, Ottawa, New York. While you're on a 3-game losing streak, trying to fight it, trying to get it right, because after that, there's some opportunity.
No, the Sabres can only look one game at a time, for sure. I think for us, you and I, we can look in the big picture, work backwards from Thanksgiving, just given kind of the indicators that historically are pretty accurate. And this team is in win now mode, they said, right? In the offseason, win now mode. Well, they got to win now. They got to win tonight, and they got to win as many of the next 9 after they win tonight, if they can win tonight, as possible. Because you got to remember, too, with Thanksgiving, it's a week later this year. They're going to have, I think, 22 games in on Thanksgiving. They're going to have fewer games to make up ground if they don't do their best in these 10 games. And when you look at this 10-game stretch, and then you look at the next 10 and the next 10 and the next 10, this is probably the most winnable stretch of 10 that they're going to have for the rest of the season. There's some pretty tough opponents that come up at various points in the schedule down the road, a couple tough ones grouped together. They haven't played some pretty good teams yet, right? Even Boston's not great this year, but it's a pretty good veteran team that is, you can expect them to get it together. They haven't played Toronto yet. Toronto, nothing's ever good enough for the media up there, but they still have a lot of firepower. There's some very good teams that they haven't faced yet.
And when you talk about before you jump into what they've got coming, because I know you've got the numbers there. When you talk about a team that is struggling to finish scoring chances, struggling to find that belief that they are that playoff team, being able to, get some confidence. The fact that this opportunity comes now early in the season, so that when the schedule does get tougher, there's, maybe some belief built up within the locker room, I think is a big deal for a team that's struggling to hit the net and capitalize on scoring chances and really gel together some new pieces and a new coach. This is the chance to make up. If not now, it probably doesn't happen.
No, I agree with you 100%. So I do want to look at this 10-game kind of mini season. That's kind of how I'm looking at it, and just kind of settle in with me for a minute. So I ran down some numbers yesterday. I didn't update them after last night's action. So if any of these teams played, they're not going to be reflected, but kind of here's the idea of where things stood, at least yesterday afternoon when I was kind of looking at this. So they have 10 games coming up, like I mentioned, kicking off tonight with Ottawa at home. These next 10 games, 5 home, 5 and away. So it's pretty fair. In that is a 3-game West Coast swing, which we'll get to in a minute. But as it stood yesterday, the next 10 opponents have a combined record of 55, 49, and 13. In the big picture there, in aggregate, it's not very daunting. And within that though, okay, you have 2 games against some very good opponents that are kind of making the numbers, like sound harder than it is actually. When you take out Minnesota, who was, as of yesterday, I think 8-1-2, and then the Rangers were 8-2-1. I believe that those were the records. It brings your other 8 opponents to a combined record of 39, 46, and 8. Okay. So that's a 466 points percentage for those remaining 8 teams. Okay. Even with the Rangers and the Wild in there, the points percentage for that group is 532. So your schedule, if the league average right now, by the way, the league average record as of yesterday was 6-5-1. That's pretty much the average record of your next 10 opponents. You take the Rangers and the Wild out and it's 5-6-1. So you kind of have a game there difference when you take the Rangers and the Wild out. But I'm looking at this saying, look, this is not a daunting schedule at all. They have a couple tough games. I think we'll get into that. I don't think tonight is actual cakewalk at all, but I just want to articulate that they can do well here if they're waking up and if Lindy's message is sinking in. And like I said, I think this is the most winnable. Go through the schedule. I would implore the audience, the listeners, to go through the schedule to see if you find, at least as it stands today, I don't want to say easy, but a more manageable chunk of games than these next 10. I do believe that that's the case here. So
they have, for people listening, Ottawa tonight, New York on the road on Thursday, home against Calgary, home against Montreal, home against St. Louis, on the road against Philly, on the road against LA, on the road against Anaheim, on the road against San Jose, and then home against Minnesota on Thanksgiving Eve to wrap up that 10-game stretch that you're talking about. Of that group, New York was a playoff team last year. LA was a playoff team last year. And that's it. And you mentioned Minnesota is definitely playing like a playoff team right now. They're getting fantastic goaltending. Kaprizov has been excellent, potential, could be in the MVP race, by the end of the year if he keeps this up. So that looks like a good team. That's 3 of the 10. We've seen them beat teams that they quote unquote should not beat before. So no game on the schedule is unwinnable, right? The NHL is too funny a league to say that, though you lose games that you should win on paper and you win games that you should lose. But really you're talking about 3 tough teams plus Ottawa. I would throw in that mix. Division game. They're playing pretty well.
Good power play.
Good
Ottawa's got a
great play.
Yeah.
They've got some pieces. They like to, drag you into the fight a little bit. They like to mix it up and get chippy. With Brady Tkachuk, they've had some chippy games against the Sabres the last few years. So by no means easy, but some points are on the table in this 10-game stretch, right? Like that trip out west, you got to be able to get 4 or 5 points out of that. I would say you got to be able to go 7-3 or 8-2, or if you're talking 20 points are on the table in this 10-game stretch, find a way to get 16 of them, 15, 16, then you're in the mix. But if it becomes a back and forth, a 5-5, a 6-4, that type of stretch, even like a 6-3-1 or a 5-4-1, you're going to be sitting here at American Thanksgiving and probably starting to count them out, right? Because depending what happens in the conference, there's just too many teams, right? You're not just chasing a team here or there. It's everybody that's ahead of them at this point. So
I think the fans will stop coming to the games if they don't win at least 7 of these next 10. I think that the calls for change will start to get a little loud from the fans, maybe for some other members of the media. I know you and I have talked about it a little bit. We started to already maybe say, hey, what's going on here? This is the time, win now mode, year 5 of the current GM's regime, for lack of a better term. And I think that, look, in these next 10 games, the Sabres are not catching any of these teams on a front end or back end of a back-to-back. They're not going to have any gifts there. They might see some backup goalies. We'll see. I mean, Quick hasn't played since October 26th. Shesterkin's played the last 3. Does he get a game? Because after, I think after the Rangers play the Sabres, they have Detroit and they have Winnipeg. So Quick's not going to play against Winnipeg. Will they put him out there for the Sabres? And Quick, by the way, has played pretty well this year. His numbers look good. I think he's won both of his starts and he's got a pretty nice save percentage. That team's playing really well. But I think, bringing it back is, zooming back into just tonight's game, Ottawa is not a easy out. They allow the second fewest 5-on-5 expected goals against, like they're not giving up a ton of those chances that historically are scored on. And like I said, their power play is 12 for 36. It's 33%. They're near the top of a league. So we'll see how it goes. But, in this, no game's easy. Like they still play against 3 teams in this 10-game stretch that are leading the league in overall save percentage: Minnesota, the Rangers, Anaheim. Lucas Dostal's been great this year. When you look at 5-on-5 save percentage, Calgary's in there. So now all of a sudden you have the top 4 teams in the league in 5-on-5 save percentage. So it's not a cakewalk. I'm not saying it's a total cakewalk or anything like that. Nothing's a cakewalk, especially when you're the Sabres and you're near the bottom of the entire league standings. But with all those things considered, those games, I think against Montreal, San Jose, and Philly especially, those are 3 of the top 5 teams in goals against per game. Those teams give up a lot of scoring chances. Those are 3 that should be winnable, and then you just got to work and figure out a way to win those other 7 as well.
Yeah, if you want to gain some confidence in your finishing and your goal scoring, there are some games on this stretch that should help you do that. As we noted on Saturday after the game, they need to play at essentially a 105-point pace to get to 95 points. That's the position they have put themselves in. In order to do that, you need to have some stretches where you rip off 8 wins in 10, 7 wins in 10. That's what good teams do. And I think it's worth also setting the stage. I always appreciate it. It's about weekly that Jay Fresh Hockey on X will send out the charts of where teams rank in various analytics. And I think it's worth setting the table for what the Sabres are, because I think there's been a little bit, Lindy Ruff has changed this tune a bit, but there's been the idea that they're doing some good things, right? That they're playing some decent hockey or they're doing this. I think some of these numbers paint a slightly different picture. Expected goal share at 5-on-5, the Sabres are 21st at just under 49%. Expected goals for at 5-on-5, so just offense, 25th. Expected goals against at 5-on-5 per 60, 17th. So average, the idea of tightening up details and limiting chances and defense and all this, they're average, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe even slightly below. They're right around the middle of the league in suppressing chances. Team finishing, which is goals scored above expected. The idea that they're not finishing chances, they're 14th, so they're average. They're worse when you go to expected goals, right? Creating the chances. So they're not good at finishing, don't get me wrong, but this is not they're 5th in the league in 5-on-5 expected goals, but 20th in finishing. They're not good at either one at the moment based on, where the league stands. And then this is a big one because you were talking about some of the goalies they face, some of the teams they face with hot goalies and good save percentage. Goals saved above expected. The Sabres are 30th in the league. And it is a growing question where Lindy has been hesitant to blame the goalies, especially immediately after a game when there's so many problems. I think that's a coach instinct to not just throw it on the goalie when you have a lot of stuff going wrong. But today he did say, when you talk about finishing, you talk about performing under pressure, we need big saves. There needs to be some big saves in big moments. Every team needs that at some point. The Sabres aren't getting it. So I think what it makes me think about, because you talk about how big this is for Kevin Adams, right? How 5th year as general manager and how big this next stretch of hockey is for Kevin Adams. The reason I think about that is because I think there has been a pattern to an extent. The 2022-23 season, you're a point away from the playoffs, and there was almost a sense that they had arrived. And so not much was done in that offseason at all, really, to bolster that team and push them forward. It was let these guys who almost got there try to get there again. They almost let some career years from guys cloud the judgment of what the team was and what the team needed. Why am I bringing that up in relation to the goaltending? Well, last year in the second half of the year, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was one of the best goalies in the NHL from January 1 on. When he is not playing that way, look what you have, right? Are Devin Levi and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen the biggest problem on this team right now? No, but they're not helping the situation. They're not covering up flaws. And so
they're statistically concerning, though, too, at the same time.
They are absolutely statistically concerning. And allowing your great goaltending to maybe cloud your judgment of what exactly was needed defensively or what exactly was needed throughout the lineup, may have been another, miscalculation. So, or even just a veteran to turn to right now, right? I think a lot of people around the league would have looked at the Sabres goalie situation and thought, give Levi a year in Rochester to really get going, find a veteran to pair with Luukkonen.
Find a James Reimer.
Find a Talbot. Find, one of these guys that can maybe catch lightning in a bottle. Look at Craig Anderson a few years ago, the way he would steal some games once in a while. Yeah. The biggest problem there was he couldn't play a lot of games. But these are all things that we're going to have to look at as things go on. And that's why by the time we get to Thanksgiving, I think we're going to have an idea of who these guys are. I think we already have a pretty good idea based on some of those numbers I just shared and, what we've seen with our eyes through 12 games. And I can hear it in Lindy Ruff, saying the standard needs to be higher and that okay hockey is not good enough. And just waiting for that message to sink in with some of the group and see it in practice. Because if not, that's where, we went through, what changes need to be made on Saturday or where you go from here. They're not there yet, but they're getting close. It's getting late early here. And trades are being made around the league, small ones, but player movement is happening all the time. And it's not easy to pull off big deals, but nobody said it was easy to be a general manager in the NHL, and certainly not for this franchise that has been struggling for so long. And I think, to your point, the fan base can only take so much, and the fan base is slow to trust and quick to stop coming if the product on the ice is more of what they've seen for the last
slow to trust, years. Quick to stop coming, and slow to return.
Slow to return.
Actually, they might be fast to return after football season if this team can get their act together.
If this team was good.
Yeah.
2022-23, there were some great crowds, and I was not here for the real heyday of the Sabres. And everybody, tells me what it was like in 06, 07 and just some of the crowds in the building. But I was here when they used to come a lot closer to selling this building out more frequently in the early days of Jack Eichel, and, seeing some of the atmospheres, like how excited this city can get about this hockey team. And if you want to capture any of that, this is your chance to do it. Because last year, I think that this is a smart fan base. These people know hockey. You see the TV ratings all the time, right? Like Buffalo watches, the Stanley Cup playoffs as much as any market, in America. I think people had a good read on this team last year and simply stopped coming to games. They saw what, they saw stuff they didn't like early on, and they weren't buying tickets. And this is your chance to capture their imagination. I thought they were starting to do it with that 3-game winning streak. I was actually surprised about the level of optimism I was seeing on social media and, from people talking about this.
People were screenshotting the standings.
That's what I mean.
And every time people do that. Yeah.
But there was I was like, wow, this is great. Like, people are excited about this team. Like, good for them. Like, I'm glad. And you can lose that quickly. And I think this is the type of stretch of hockey where you could lose that, or you could take advantage of it. If teams do it, right? You know, people probably think we're crazy talking about them going 8-2. Teams do that in the NHL.
Teams do that, and
make up ground.
And the fans are intelligent, and a lot of things for what you just said are why I think they will realize I'm not being dramatic when I say that this is the most important 10-game stretch of Kevyn Adams' tenure as GM, because you have an ability to get in here, take better control of your destiny, not rely on going on a heater at the end of the year or relying on the Red Wings or some other team that's ahead of you in the standings to totally crap down their legs, which have happened the past couple of seasons. The urgency has to start tonight. Every line against Ottawa, but they have to carry it through this 10-game stretch. That's why I'm looking at it again. Just, I hope you can settle in with me over the next couple of weeks. This is a mini season. That's all it is. And you have to be one of the best teams in the league here in these 10 games. And then obviously keep it up after that, but you got to survive this mini season to even be relevant after Thanksgiving. That's my whole point in this. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be really interesting, but we're going to do a quick one today. We're already over half an hour in. We're trying something different today. Any final words, Matthew, before we get out of here on a very, it's been lengthy, but yet it's not our normal, Baker Fairburn hockey show. We're doing a little quick hitter today. And I think this is a good cruising altitude for us, but do you have anything else to close us out with?
I think that's a good place to put a bow on it, where I would love to hear what listeners and people think of both what we're talking about here of this mini season, but also this different format that we're trying out to get some more episodes out to you guys in a quicker hitting fashion. And it means that we don't get the chat, but we'll be back for the chat, and they'll get theirs. But I like doing it this way to hit on some different topics and get some more episodes out there to people. So let us know, like the video, comment what you think the Sabres record will be during this 10-game mini season that Kris has outlined, and we'll see. I am, for one, tickled that they are playing the Senators on Election Day. I just think that's funny to me.
Little irony.
Somebody was having fun with the schedule.
Yeah, irony can be very ironic sometimes, as they say. All right, Matthew, yep, that's a good call out. If you could please like this video and hit the comment section, let us know what you think the Sabres record will be in this 10-game little mini season. I'll come up with a different name for that maybe as we go, but we're going to be tracking it as Matthew and I continue to get together here in the month of November. You can find Matthew Fairburn's work at theathletic.com/Sabres. You can find him on X at Matthew Fairburn. You can find me on X at Sabres Prospects. So for Matthew, for the production crew that's out enjoying this lovely day, hopefully they're raking leaves, I'm Kris Baker. We'll see you again very soon.